Hey guys, if you were born an ancient Egyptian child under the watchful gaze of priests and priestesses who took your very first breath as a signal to start weaving your fate in matters of the heart, your cradle would not be just a bundle of reeds and linen. It would be a miniature shrine. The air would be thick with incense smoke curling upward toward a painted ceiling, carrying murmured invocations to Hathor, goddess of love, and Bes, the squat, smiling protector of households and romance. A scribe might already be scratching your name on a scrap of papyrus for the temple records, and your grandmother would be squinting at your face to decide whether you had the lotus eyes said to attract kindness and fidelity. You probably won't survive this with any modern skepticism intact, because here, even your smallest yawn could be read as a good omen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your world begins in a reed-roofed room attached to the family courtyard, where the floor is cool-packed earth and the walls smell faintly of the clay they were shaped from. Your mother, her hair still damp from ritual washing, leans over you wearing a necklace of glazed beads shaped like tiny papyrus stalks. She believes, as does everyone present, that the moment of your birth is a doorway for both blessings and dangers, and so the priests chant over you, not in haste, but in slow, rolling cadences meant to seal your spirit against ill fortune. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows that temple priests did attend births in some households, particularly those with status or devotion to a particular deity. The quirky detail, though, is that along with the expected invocations, some families would bribe the attending priest to slip in an extra line or two requesting harmony in marriage or a heart pleasing to many. These were the kind of personal edits no temple record would ever note, but that people whispered about later over bread and beer. You're swaddled tightly in soft linen, the fibers faintly scratchy from their last wash in natron, and above your head, someone ties a strip of red-dyed cloth to the cradle frame, red being the color associated with vitality, passion, and protective magic. The incense smoke makes patterns that, to the watching midwife, look like the outline of two entwined birds, and she murmurs to your aunt that it means your heart will never be lonely. You, of course, simply blink against the light, unaware that a lifetime of love charms and superstitions has already been weaving itself around you like the linen on your skin.
The chanting fades into memory, but before the first week of your life is out, another layer is added to the web of protections and predictions around you. The first amulet is tied. It is a small thing in size, no bigger than your mother's thumb, but it is carved from faience in the shape of a heart scarab, the same beetle that Egyptians believed symbolized rebirth, transformation, and the ability to speak truth in the afterlife. The mainstream fact, recorded on countless tomb walls and amuletic catalogs, is that scarabs were not just decorative. They were inscribed with spells and words meant to influence both this life and the next. In your case, the heart scarab is uninscribed. You can't read yet, after all, but its very form is thought to guard the center of your being, not only from illness or misfortune, but from any future betrayal in love. It is strung on a simple cord made from twisted linen threads, the kind spun in the women's quarters and scented faintly with whatever oil was used to soften the fibers. Your mother holds it up to the light, turning it slowly as if testing its readiness to carry such an important burden. Then she ties it gently around your tiny torso, under the layers of swaddling, so it rests just above your stomach. The knot is not random. She loops it in a pattern taught to her by her own mother, a looping twist that is said to close the circle and keep good fortune from slipping away. Historians still argue whether such charms for infants were primarily meant for general protection, or whether, as some fringe theories suggest, certain amulet shapes were quietly chosen to set the tone for the child's adult relationships. The quirky tidbit that floats through some old village tales is that if a child's first amulet was lost or broken before they could walk, it meant their heart would wander. They would spend life chasing affections that never stayed. You, being watched by half a dozen careful relatives, are in no danger of that. Once it's tied, the scarab becomes part of you. You can't see it, but you can feel its cool surface against your warm skin, a little weight that shifts when you are lifted or rocked. As the days go by, the cord darkens from contact with the oils and powders used to keep your skin supple, and the faience takes on a slight polish from rubbing against the swaddling. At night, when you are set down to sleep, your mother runs her fingers over it once more before covering you, making sure it's still there, still holding the space it was meant to protect. Life in the courtyard hums around you. The slap of dough on baking stones, the lowing of cattle somewhere beyond the walls, the soft rise and fall of conversations carried on in the shade. You are far too young to understand any of it, but the amulet is already absorbing the rhythms of your home. The warmth of your mother's arms, the sound of the Nile wind through the reed mats, the scent of crushed lotus drifting in from the jar by the doorway. The adults may believe they have tied your fortune to this small beetle-shaped charm, but in truth, it is tying you to them, binding your earliest memories to the physical weight of protection, love, and superstition. By the time your tiny fingers curl with more intention and your gaze lingers on the world instead of floating past it, another ritual of your earliest months begins to take shape: the honey milk feedings. To an outsider, it might look like nothing more than an indulgent treat, a sweetened drink to soothe the restless infant. But in your household, and in many others across the banks of the Nile, it is considered a deliberate act of attraction magic. The mainstream fact is that honey in ancient Egypt was prized not only as food, but as medicine and offering. It was placed in tombs for the afterlife, given to the gods in small clay jars, and mixed with other ingredients for healing. Here, it is blended with milk, sometimes from goats, sometimes from cows, to create a symbolic sweetness, a liquid charm meant to season your future, so that affection, kindness, and warmth might come to you as naturally as the taste of this mixture. Your mother prepares it in the mornings, when the light is soft and the heat not yet pressing on the mud brick walls. The milk is warmed slightly, just enough to carry the honey into it, and she stirs with a reed, whispering under her breath words she half remembers from her own mother. They're not grand temple spells, just little homegrown lines about sweetness sticking to you like bees to blossoms. Historians still argue whether such muttered rhymes were remnants of formal incantations or simply domestic habits dressed up as magic by later storytellers. The quirky tidbit, one that your aunt delights in repeating, is that if a fly drowns in the honey before it reaches your lips, it is a sign that a jealous rival will one day be swallowed by your charm. She says it with a wink, and even though you don't understand, her voice makes the air around you warm with the laughter of those who believe in such signs. The feeding itself is a slow affair. You taste the first drops, and your tongue learns quickly to expect the mellow sweetness. Some days the milk is thinner, some days richer, depending on the animal and the season, but always the honey carries a faint floral trace from the blossoms the bees have visited: lotus, clover, sometimes cedar. Your lips glisten, and your mother smiles, convinced that this glow is the start of an inner light that will one day draw others to you without effort. Outside,
The Nile sways in its slow current, ferrying fishermen and traders past the city. Inside, the soft lap of liquid in the small clay cup marks your morning. Each sip, in the mind of your family, is not just nourishment, but a layering of sweetness over your destiny. Long after you've swallowed it, the faint stickiness on your chin remains, a tiny tactile reminder, not to you, but to them, that love, in their world, is something you begin training for almost as soon as you can swallow.
You are not yet walking, but already the room around your sleeping mat has begun to collect little objects meant to lean your fate toward harmony and devotion. One of the first is a tiny figurine of Hathor, carved in smooth limestone, her face serene beneath the curve of the cow's horns and the sun disk. The mainstream fact is that Hathor was worshipped not only as the goddess of love, beauty, and music, but also as a protective mother figure. She was invoked in matters of fertility, childbirth, and the well-being of children. For your household, she is the natural choice to preside over your growth, so the figurine is placed high on a small shelf, just above where you sleep, so her gaze, or so they believe, falls directly on you through the night. The figurine's presence is not silent, at least not in the minds of your family. When the wind rattles the reed mats on the walls, your grandmother will murmur that Hathor is shaking her earrings, a sign that she approves of the baby she watches over. Historians still argue whether such household interpretations were officially recognized religious gestures or purely local inventions that flourished far from the gaze of temple authorities. Either way, it gives your home a language of its own, one where the creak of the wood or the flicker of an oil lamp can become a divine nod or warning. The quirky tidbit your uncle likes to share is that, according to some old midwives, if a child sleeps under the image of Hathor for a full year without falling ill, it means their first love will find them before they find it. He tells it with the same tone he uses for river merchant gossip, as if he half believes it, half just enjoys watching people nod gravely at the thought. You grow used to the goddess's calm face above you. In the dim light of an evening lamp, the pale stone seems to glow faintly, though you're too young to know whether that's the effect of flame or imagination. Your mother sometimes hums softly before laying you down, a wordless tune she insists was taught to her by her own mother's mother, one that makes Hathor smile. The sound is gentle, repetitive, hypnotic, the sort of melody that works on you even if you don't know what it's for. On nights when the Nile breeze carries the scent of fresh lotus into your room, the little figurine seems even more alive, the shadow of her horns stretching across the wall like arms reaching to cradle you. To your family, this is not superstition layered over reality. It is reality itself, stitched into daily life. You drift to sleep in this web, stone, shadow, scent, and sound, as the goddess stands watch above, patient and unmoving, while your first year rolls onward, like the steady current of the river outside. By the time your legs can wobble under your own weight and your fingers clutch at anything within reach, the household adds another layer to your invisible armor, the ochre dusting. It happens in the quiet hours before the midday heat, when the air in the courtyard still carries the faint coolness of the night. Your mother takes a small linen pouch from the niche in the wall, its drawstring knotted in the same looping twist as your heart scarab cord. Inside is powdered red ochre, ground from iron-rich stone until it is as fine as flour. The mainstream fact is that red ochre was widely used in ancient Egypt for both cosmetic and symbolic purposes. It colored lips and cheeks, but it also marked vitality, life force, and divine favor. For you, this dust is not applied for beauty alone. Your mother dips her fingertips into it and gently brushes a thin streak across your forehead, then down the bridge of your nose. She believes, as many do, that this will ward off the evil eye, the envious glance that could wither health, sour fortune, or twist love before it blooms. Historians still argue whether this particular ochre ritual was a carryover from pre-dynastic traditions or a purely domestic invention that temple scribes would have found amusingly beneath their notice. The quirky tidbit, passed in whispers by older women, is that if a child's ochre streak fades too quickly during the day, it means they will be quick to blush in love, a sign of a heart easily moved, perhaps too easily. Your grandmother, who watches the streak disappear from your skin before the afternoon meal, clucks her tongue in mock concern, but can't hide a smile. The sensation for you is subtle. The powder is so light that it feels like nothing at all, yet the faint mineral scent lingers in your nostrils, earthy and dry. As you toddle around the shaded courtyard, the sunlight sometimes catches the dust, making your skin seem to glow faintly orange for a moment before shadow takes it again. To the adults, it's a reassuring sight, a visible charm against invisible dangers. Life around you continues in its slow pulse. A neighbor passes by, pausing to comment on your strong color, which your mother takes as a sign the charm is working. Somewhere in the background, the steady sound of grain being ground on stone echoes softly, mingling with the buzz of flies in the heat. These small sensory details become part of the memory of the ochre days. The faint scratch of linen against your cheek, the rhythmic hum of work, the warmth that rises from the clay floor under your bare feet. By evening, the streak has faded to a ghost of its morning self, and your mother brushes the last traces away with her thumb before settling you for sleep. You won't remember these moments, but the dust leaves its mark all the same, pressed not into your skin, but into the family's quiet certainty that every small act, every color, every mineral in their world can lean your life toward love, safety, and a fate they can almost, but never quite, control.
You are old enough now to sit on a low reed mat beside the women as they work, your small hands playing with whatever safe scraps they hand you, a smooth bead, a loop of palm fiber, a shard of broken pottery with no sharp edges. It is during one of these quiet afternoons that you first witness the thread-tying ritual, a charm meant to bind affection to you in the years ahead. The mainstream fact is that knots and cords in ancient Egypt were not just practical, they were symbolic, representing binding agreements, control over unseen forces, and the holding fast of blessings or protection. In your case, the cord is made from strips of dyed flax, twisted together until it has the springy texture of something both strong and flexible. Your grandmother measures it loosely against your small wrist, not to wear now, but to keep until a certain festival day when it will be ceremonially tied. The color is a deep, sun-soaked blue, indigo mixed with hints of woad, chosen because it is believed to keep jealousy at bay, like a cool river washing over hot tempers. Historians still argue whether this belief in blue's protective quality came from imported traditions or whether it was an organic Egyptian association with the life-giving Nile. The quirky tidbit your aunt adds, with a half laugh, is that if the knot slips easily when finally tied, it means your future spouse will chase you more than you chase them, which everyone agrees is the better end of the bargain. She winks, as if this is knowledge worth tucking away even at your age. You watch the twisting of the cord, the way the fibers tighten and align under your grandmother's thumb. She hums softly, not a tune you know, but one with a rise and fall that feels like breathing,
The scent of flax and plant dye hangs in the warm air, mingling with the faint sweetness of dates from the plate nearby. You reach for the cord, and your fingers catch on the tiny irregularities in its weave, each bump and twist a silent record of the hands that made it. When she finishes, the cord is coiled neatly and placed in a small alabaster jar with a lid that fits snugly. It will stay there, in the cool shadow of the storage niche, until the day it is meant to be tied. For now, it is enough that it exists, a future promise, a thread that will one day loop around your life as surely as it loops around itself. In the courtyard beyond, the voices of neighbors rise and fall, carrying fragments of gossip about the river level, the temple's latest festival, and who saw whose goat in whose garden. But here, in the dim shade of the workroom, your world is measured in slow, deliberate movements. A twist, a knot, a coil, each one adding to the invisible pattern of protections being woven around you.
You have started to wander farther from the shaded courtyard, your bare feet learning the feel of packed earth, sun-warmed stone, and the softer give of sandy patches near the edge of the gardens. On certain mornings, your mother takes you to visit the house of a neighbor known for her skill in mixing protective oils. Not the heavy temple incense, but subtle blends used in homes, weddings, and, most curiously, in charms meant to invite love or keep it steady once found. The mainstream fact is that scented oils were a cornerstone of ancient Egyptian daily life, used not only for personal grooming, but as offerings, medicine, and magical tools. Their recipes recorded in temple texts and whispered in kitchens alike. The woman's workroom is cool and dim, the air thick with mingling aromas, crushed myrrh, sweet marjoram, and a faint citrus tang from imported fruits. You sit on your mother's lap while the neighbor grinds dried petals with a stone pestle, adding drops of oil from a clay flask. Historians still argue whether such love oils were genuinely believed to sway the hearts of others, or were more about giving the wearer confidence, a fragrant cloak of self-assurance in a world where scent carried social meaning. The quirky tidbit your mother shares, almost as a confession, is that one of the local girls once dabbed this oil on her wrists before meeting a fisherman she fancied, only for the fisherman's donkey to follow her home instead, braying loudly until morning. Ever since, the oil has been jokingly nicknamed the stubborn admirer. You watch as a small amount is poured into a narrow vial, sealed with a bit of beeswax. Your mother will keep it in the carved wooden chest at home, alongside scraps of fabric, beads, and amulets, a growing treasury of things you are too young to use, but old enough to associate with a strange, gentle kind of power. As you leave, the sun outside seems almost blinding after the scented dimness, and a warm breeze wraps around you, carrying hints of lotus from the nearby canal. Your mother walks slowly, her free hand brushing the tops of tall grass, as if the movement alone could stir more fragrance from the oil now hidden away. The scent still clings faintly to her skin, and you breathe it in without thought, already linking it with safety, closeness, and the small mysteries that seem to collect quietly around your life.
The mornings grow longer now, and you spend more time in the market with your mother, your small hand curled around the woven cord of her basket as she moves from stall to stall.
This market is not the grand, stone-pillared kind near the temple, but the smaller, sun-dappled one at the edge of the residential quarter, where traders spread goods on reed mats and the scents mingle into a perfume of their own: sun-baked grain, fresh figs, goat's milk, and the sharper tang of fish on woven trays. Here is where the next charm in your growing invisible collection comes into play: the carved fertility figurine. The mainstream fact is that in ancient Egypt, small figurines, often of deities like Hathor or Bes, were kept not only by those hoping for children, but also as protective talismans for already born children, ensuring health, affection, and a life surrounded by companionship. Your mother stops at the stall of an elderly carver whose hands are gnarled like the roots of an old sycamore, yet astonishingly steady as they chip away at soft limestone. She has come for a figure of Bes, the squat, bearded dwarf god, whose wide eyes and protruding tongue are as much a warning to evil spirits as they are a comic comfort to those under his watch. You crouch down to see better, your face level with the rows of tiny figures, some in stone, some in faience glazed a cheerful turquoise. Historians still argue whether these figurines were meant primarily as household gods, purely decorative charms, or if they carried a more personal magic activated by touch, whispers, or placement near the bed. The quirky tidbit the carver offers with a grin is that he once made a Bes with such an exaggerated tongue that a jealous neighbor accused him of mocking their mother-in-law. The figurine sold in a single afternoon to a man who claimed it kept rats out of his grain jars. Your mother chooses a piece with just enough wear to feel warm and familiar, not cold from the chisel. She presses it into your small hands for a moment, before tucking it into the folds of her sash. The stone feels heavier than it looks, and its bulging eyes seem to watch even as you walk away. On the way home, you pass a group of older children chasing each other around the corner of a mud brick wall. One of them stops, points to your mother's sash, and calls out that Bes will make sure you never run out of friends, a prophecy shouted between giggles before they dart away again. You're too young to understand the depth of it, but the words lodge somewhere quiet in your mind, alongside the cool memory of the figurine's rounded edges and the faint dust it left on your palm. At home, Bes is placed in a niche above where you sleep, joining the silent assembly of charms that seem to grow around you without your conscious asking. And though you can't see it in the dim lamplight that evening, your mother glances at him before she leaves the room, as if expecting, or perhaps confirming, that the watch has already begun.
The afternoons are warm and slow, and sometimes your mother lets you nap outside under the shade of a sycamore, the air moving gently enough to stir the edges of the linen cloth laid over you. It's on one of these lazy days that you first notice the small pouch she wears tied at her waist. Not every day, but often enough that you begin to associate it with something special. This is the sachet of mixed herbs, a charm that works quietly, like the wind itself, guarding against unwanted attention and inviting only the kind that lingers. The mainstream fact is that ancient Egyptians used bundles of aromatic plants for more than just pleasant smells. They believed that certain herbs, when bound together in specific proportions, could influence moods, ward off envy, or even stir feelings of affection. These sachets were not burned or boiled, but worn close to the body so that the oils released with warmth would mingle with the person's natural scent. You watch one afternoon as your mother opens hers to replace the contents. She does this with deliberate care, untying the small knot, tipping the faded herbs into the garden soil, then filling the pouch with fresh sprigs of sweet rush, mint, and just a pinch of crushed cinnamon bark. Historians still argue whether these combinations were standardized formulas or if each family had its own variations passed quietly from one generation to the next.
The quirky tidbit your aunt mentions, with a smirk that makes your mother roll her eyes, is that a girl once wore a sachet so stuffed with cinnamon that her intended groom sneezed through the entire proposal, which some took as a sign that their marriage would be spicy. As your mother works, the air around you becomes layered, the green brightness of mint, the mellow sweetness of rush, and the warm spice of cinnamon that seems to hum in the afternoon heat. She hands you a stray mint leaf, and you chew it slowly, the cool taste blooming in your mouth while her fingers finish tying the cord. That evening, when she tucks the sachet into the folds of her belt, you realize that its presence is like an invisible signal, the kind of thing that can't be seen but changes the way people look at her. Neighbors greet her with an extra smile, the market seller adds an extra fig without asking, and even the old cat by the gate chooses to curl against her feet. By the time you drift to sleep, the faint scent of her sachet is still in your nose, wrapping you in something both protective and strangely expectant, as if the air itself has decided to keep you company until morning.
The river has begun to run a little higher after recent rains upstream, and with it comes a livelier hum of trade along the banks. You accompany your mother and father one morning to meet a cousin who works on a boat bringing goods from a neighboring town. While they talk in the shade of the awning, your attention drifts to the necklaces laid out on a reed mat nearby, strings of beads in glazed blues and greens, the occasional bright red, and most curious of all, small pendants shaped like hearts, flowers, or tiny animals. This is where you first encounter the Menat necklace, a charm worn not just for beauty, but for love and favor. The mainstream fact is that in ancient Egypt, Menat necklaces, with their strings of beads and counterweights at the back, were sacred to Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and joy. They were believed to bring pleasure to the wearer, and in ceremonial use could be shaken so that the beads clicked softly, pleasing the goddess and inviting her blessings. Women wore them for beauty, but also for the subtle promise of drawing affection and harmonious relationships. You crouch near the vendor, watching his hands move across the strings. He tells your parents how the counterweight keeps the necklace balanced so it sits comfortably on the chest, and, lowering his voice, how certain bead colors are chosen when someone hopes to win a particular person's attention. Historians still argue whether the color symbolism was truly fixed, whether blue always meant faithfulness, or if it could simply mean, "I found good faience glaze today." The quirky tidbit the vendor offers, with a wink, is that a young bride once wore her menat so loosely that it slipped into the cooking pot during the wedding feast, and she swore the stew tasted sweeter for years afterward. Your mother doesn't buy one this time, but the vendor lets you hold a small strand, its cool beads clinking faintly as you shift your fingers. You imagine that faint sound traveling through the air, like a secret signal that only certain ears can hear. Walking home, you notice the way jewelry catches sunlight, a flash here, a spark there, and it feels like those glints are messages being sent and received all around you too. So subtle for you to fully understand, but present nonetheless. By nightfall, you find yourself still hearing the quiet clink of those beads in your mind, as if they've been strung along the edges of your thoughts, promising that someday, when you're older, they might mean something more. The days grow warmer, and the house fills with the sound of pounding grain, splashing water, and the occasional clatter of clay vessels being moved about. Your father is preparing for a small feast in honor of a visiting relative, and the whole family seems to be swept up in the tide of activity. It's during these preparations that you first notice the carefully folded strip of linen your mother keeps tucked in a pottery jar. At first, it seems like just another piece of cloth, but when she unrolls it, you see that it is covered in painted symbols, tiny hieroglyphs inked in red and black. This, she explains softly, is a love spell, written for protection and harmony in the household. The mainstream fact is that ancient Egyptians sometimes inscribed spells on papyrus or cloth, combining words of devotion with invocations to gods like Hathor, Isis, or Thoth, depending on whether the charm was meant to attract affection, protect an existing bond, or mend a strained one. These spells could be worn, hidden under clothing, placed in bedding, or kept in a household shrine. The words themselves, once spoken or even silently acknowledged, were thought to hold power. Your mother doesn't read the words aloud. She says some are not meant for casual ears, but she lets you trace the painted lines with your fingertip. The ink feels slightly raised, the red symbols warmer to the touch than the black, though you suspect that might just be your imagination. Historians still argue whether the red ink truly had a stronger magical potency, or if its use was symbolic, marking divine names or dangerous phrases. The quirky tidbit your father mentions, chuckling as he polishes a jug, is that he once heard of a young scribe who tried to write his own love charm, only to accidentally copy a tax collection notice on the back. Apparently, the object of his affection agreed to marry him, but only after insisting he pay off her father's debts first. As the feast approaches, your mother places the folded linen in a small wooden box, setting it near the head of the sleeping mat. She does it without fanfare, as though this act is as normal as arranging bowls or lighting the oil lamp. But you notice the way she pauses for a moment, fingertips resting on the box lid, her eyes distant, perhaps reciting the spell silently in her mind. That night, with the faint hum of conversation still drifting through the walls from the courtyard, you fall asleep knowing there is a secret, ink-bound guardian watching over the room, its painted words working quietly in the space between breaths and dreams.
Morning comes with the soft rustle of palm fronds against the breeze and the smell of yesterday's embers still lingering in the courtyard. You wake to find your grandmother already sitting outside, her hands busy with a task you've never seen before. In her lap rests a small lump of what looks like pale wax, but when she lifts it to show you, you catch a faint scent of honey and resin. She tells you it's beeswax, mixed with perfumed oil, shaped into a cone and meant to be worn on the head during gatherings or ceremonies. A slow melting charm for beauty and attraction. The mainstream fact is that in ancient Egypt, perfumed wax cones were sometimes worn at banquets or festivals, placed atop wigs or hair. As the evening went on, the wax would soften in the heat, releasing fragrance that mingled with the person's natural scent. It wasn't purely about smelling nice. Many believed that specific scents, especially blends including myrrh or lotus, could influence how others felt toward you, making interactions warmer, friendlier, or perhaps more receptive to subtle hints of romance. You watch as your grandmother shapes the cone with steady fingers, pressing dried petals of blue lotus into the surface. She hums softly, almost as if the rhythm of her song keeps the wax pliable. Historians still argue whether these cones were always made from wax, or if some were entirely symbolic, painted onto tomb scenes to represent joy and abundance without being physically present. The quirky tidbit she shares, with a sly smile that makes you think she's remembering something from her own youth, is about a friend who wore a wax cone so heavily scented with frankincense that every dog in the neighborhood followed her home, convinced she was carrying treats. By midday, the cone is finished, resting on a shallow dish in the shade. She explains that it's to be worn for a wedding next week, a gift for the bride from her closest friends. She lets you hold it for a moment, and your fingers come away slightly sticky, the scent already clinging to your skin in a way that feels oddly comforting. That evening, as you lie down to sleep, the faint fragrance still lingers in your mind, wrapping itself around your thoughts. You imagine it drifting like invisible threads through the air at the wedding, twining around conversations and laughter, drawing people together in ways too subtle for the untrained eye to see, yet powerful enough to last in memory long after the wax is gone.
The air is warm and dry the next morning, carrying the familiar scent of baked earth, and you follow your father to the edge of the market where he needs to barter for a few household goods. Between the stalls of vegetables, jars of honey, and bolts of linen, you notice a small table set apart from the rest, its surface covered with tiny figures, some carved from wood, others molded from clay, and a few glimmering faintly as if made from copper or bronze. They are amulets, the vendor explains, each shaped like a different deity or symbol, meant to guard the heart or draw affection, depending on the wearer's desire. The mainstream fact is that amulets were deeply embedded in Egyptian life, not only as protective talismans, but also as subtle instruments of influence. A figure of Hathor might be worn to inspire love or charm. A small bess, the squat, leonine dwarf god, could encourage fertility and joy. An ankh could symbolize life and enduring bonds. These objects were carried on the person, sewn into clothing, or even placed in bedding to ensure that blessings, once called upon, would linger close. You lean closer to inspect a particular charm shaped like a cat, its body arched in a graceful curve, the tail curling elegantly. The vendor says it honors Bastet, the goddess associated with both domestic harmony and the softer, alluring qualities of companionship. Historians still argue whether every household cat in Egypt was considered a living symbol of Bastet, or if the goddess's feline form was more ceremonial, reserved for temple rituals and formal offerings. The quirky tidbit the vendor shares, lowering his voice conspiratorially, is about a fisherman who once lost his lucky Bastet amulet to a particularly bold river otter, which apparently dove right off the bank, snatched the charm from a basket, and swam away. The man claimed his catches were smaller for years afterward, though it's hard to say whether it was the missing charm or just his bad habit of napping in the boat. Your father, amused by your fascination, buys a small faience ankh, its turquoise glaze catching the sunlight in tiny flashes. He tells you it's not just for love, it's for life, which includes love, but also the strength to live through seasons when love feels far away. That night, you keep the little amulet under your pillow. It's cool to the touch at first, but soon warms to your skin, and you wonder if that warmth is just your own body, or if the charm is already at work, quietly shaping the dreams you'll have before the dawn.
The following week begins with an unusual commotion in the courtyard. Your mother and two of her neighbors huddled together over a shallow bronze basin, their hands moving with the quiet precision of people who know exactly what they are doing. Inside the basin is water drawn at dawn from the river, its surface catching the sunlight in a thin shimmer. You watch as they sprinkle crushed petals into it, along with what looks like finely ground malachite. The mixture swirls, releasing a faintly sweet, mineral scent. The mainstream fact is that in ancient Egypt, water drawn at specific times, particularly sunrise or during certain lunar phases, was believed to hold enhanced potency for ritual purposes. When infused with flowers, minerals, or resins, it could be used as a love charm, intended to wash away misfortune or draw toward affection. The ritual often included spoken words, murmured in a rhythm designed to blend with the movement of the water, reinforcing the intention with both sound and sight. Your mother dips a strip of clean linen into the basin, then wrings it out over a jar. This water, she explains, will be kept sealed until it's needed, usually before a meeting with someone important, or to bless a newlywed's home.
Historians still argue whether the power was believed to reside in the water itself, or if the ritual simply provided a moment of focus for the person using it, shaping their own thoughts and actions in subtle ways. The quirky tidbit one neighbor offers, with a smirk, is about a woman who once poured such water over her doorway to welcome a suitor, only for it to attract not just him, but also his 2 cousins, 3 of his goats, and a very persistent goose that refused to leave for days. As the women finish, they carry the jar indoors, wrapping it in cloth to keep the light from touching it. The quiet care with which they handle it makes you realize that for them, this is no simple household task. It's a form of invisible weaving, binding unseen threads between people's hearts. That evening, while you rest on your mat, you think of that jar sitting in the cool shadows of the storage room. You picture the petals and minerals settling to the bottom, waiting patiently, as if time itself is an ingredient in the charm, slow and steady, working long before anyone drinks or sprinkles a single drop.
The marketplace feels busier than usual today. Voices overlapping in a low, constant hum, the air carrying the scent of baked bread, hot sand, and spices that tingle faintly in your nose. You weave between stalls until your eye catches on a display of small pouches hanging from a wooden frame, their surfaces embroidered with colored thread in patterns you don't recognize. The merchant, an older man with deep smile lines and a voice like dry papyrus, notices your interest and invites you closer. The mainstream fact is that such pouches, often made of linen or soft leather, were used to hold mixtures of herbs, resins, or small symbolic items believed to influence fortune or feelings. In the context of love, a pouch might contain coriander seeds, thought to stimulate warmth between couples, or shavings of cinnamon bark for attraction, alongside tiny charms carved from bone or faience. They could be worn discreetly under clothing or hung over the bed to let their contents whisper their influence during sleep. You watch as the merchant opens one of the pouches, releasing a scent that's both sharp and sweet. Inside, you see a dried rosebud, a few strands of some fibrous plant, and a pinch of reddish powder. He explains that the powder is crushed carnelian, a stone associated with vitality and courage, useful, he says with a wink, for those too shy to speak their feelings. Historians still argue whether the symbolism of each ingredient was consistent across Egypt or if individual regions had their own interpretations, with some treating carnelian as a purely protective stone rather than one of love. For the quirky tidbit, the merchant tells you about a fisherman's daughter who kept a pouch like this under her pillow. She swore it made the boy she liked smile at her every morning on his way to the river, until the day her little brother stole the pouch and used it to try to make his pet goat like him better. The goat reportedly followed him everywhere for weeks, even into the bathhouse, much to the family's dismay. You run your fingers over the embroidered patterns, feeling the slight unevenness where the stitches tighten. It occurs to you that the pouch is as much about touch as it is about scent, the comfort of having something tangible to hold on to when emotions feel as unsteady as the Nile's current. That night, as you fall asleep, you think about what you might place in your own pouch someday, not just to attract love, but to carry the memory of a moment, sealed away in cloth and thread, ready to be opened when the heart needs reminding. The next afternoon, the heat presses down like a thick blanket, and you find yourself seeking the cool dimness of your grandmother's house. She is seated near the open window, carefully grinding something in a shallow stone bowl. You recognize the earthy scent of honey, but mingled with it is something more resinous, almost smoky. She looks up, smiling faintly, and gestures for you to come closer.
The mainstream fact is that honey played an important role in ancient Egyptian life, not only as food and medicine, but also as a key ingredient in certain love charms. It was considered a binding substance, sweet, enduring, and able to preserve whatever it touched. In matters of the heart, it was sometimes mixed with powdered herbs or resins and placed on offerings, or even discreetly dabbed onto the skin or lips before meeting someone whose affection was sought. The sweetness was believed to transfer itself into the words spoken and the way they were received. Your grandmother's mixture includes honey, powdered cinnamon, and a trace of myrrh, the latter giving it that deep, almost sacred aroma. Historians still argue whether such recipes were more symbolic, representing sweetness and allure, or whether the scents themselves subtly influenced mood and memory. She shares a quirky tidbit, her voice dropping into the conspiratorial tone she uses for family stories. Years ago, a neighbor tried to use a honey charm on a baker she admired. Unfortunately, she spilled the mixture all over the bread he was preparing for market. The bread sold quickly, but not because of the charm. Apparently, people simply liked the unusual flavor, and the baker made it a regular recipe. He did eventually marry, but to someone else entirely. You watch as your grandmother scrapes the thick golden paste into a small clay jar, sealing it with a snug lid. She tells you it must be kept away from ants, but close to the person it's meant for, as if love itself needs both protection and proximity to grow. Later, lying on your mat, you imagine the jar sitting in the quiet shadows of her shelf, its scent slowly deepening over the days. You think about how much of these practices are like the river's flow, invisible currents, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong, always moving just beneath the surface, shaping lives in ways you may never fully see.
The morning begins with the smell of incense curling through the air, sharp and spicy, clinging to your clothes as you follow the sound of rhythmic chanting toward the small shrine at the edge of the neighborhood. A group of women are gathered there, their heads covered with light linen scarves, each carrying something in their hands: a small dish, a folded cloth, a bundle of herbs. You hesitate at the entrance, but one of them waves you forward, and you step into the shaded space where the walls are painted with faded images of lotus flowers and protective deities. The mainstream fact is that incense in ancient Egypt was not just for honoring the gods. It was also part of private rituals, including those aimed at love or personal attraction. Certain blends made from frankincense, myrrh, and sometimes kefi, a complex mixture of herbs, resins, wine, and honey, were believed to open the heart or sweeten the spirit of the person who inhaled the scent. The smoke was thought to rise with the petitioner's desires, carrying them to the gods or intertwining them with the unseen forces at play in daily life. One of the older women holds a clay burner, the coals inside glowing faintly as she sprinkles a pinch of resin over them. A thick ribbon of fragrant smoke unfurls, drifting lazily toward the open doorway. She tells you, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, that if you stand in the smoke and then walk past someone you love, they'll think of you the rest of the day. Historians still argue whether this was a widely held belief or a more local superstition, perhaps rooted in the association between scent, memory, and emotion. For the quirky tidbit, another woman recalls a friend who tried this smoke walk on a man who sold melons at the market. It worked, in a way. He couldn't stop thinking about her, but unfortunately, the only thing he could remember was that she smelled exactly like the stall next to his, which sold smoked fish. Their courtship did not progress. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the incense coil around you, the scent sinking into your skin and hair. It's easy to imagine how such a ritual could feel like an invisible thread,
tying you to someone else's thoughts. And yet, you can't help but notice that everyone here seems just as enchanted by the ritual itself as by any hoped-for result, as if the act of gathering, of sharing smoke and stories, is its own form of magic. Walking home, the faint aroma still clinging to you, you wonder if tomorrow someone might catch the scent and pause, not because of the charm, but because they'll be reminded of a quiet morning, a shaded shrine, and the way the air felt heavy with unspoken wishes.
The day drifts into late afternoon, and you wandered toward the river, where the light scatters and ripples across the water's surface. Down by the bank, an elderly man in a frayed linen tunic is hunched over a long strip of palm fiber, weaving it with the slow patience of someone who has done this for decades. You stop to watch, and he glances up with a toothless smile, gesturing for you to sit beside him. The mainstream fact is that in ancient Egypt, braided cords were more than just practical ties for bundles or clothing. They often carried symbolic meaning, especially in matters of protection and attraction. When used in love charms, cords might be dyed red, the color associated with vitality, desire, and the goddess Hathor. Some cords were knotted a specific number of times, often 7 or 9, as each knot was believed to bind the affection of the desired person more tightly. These cords could be worn around the wrist, ankle, or waist, or hidden in bedding to work their quiet influence during sleep. The man works with a cord dyed a deep reddish brown, his gnarled fingers moving with steady precision. He tells you that each twist of the fiber should be done while thinking of the person you love, and each knot tied while whispering their name softly. Historians still argue whether this practice was meant to invoke divine attention or simply to help the maker focus their intention, much like repeating a mantra. For the quirky tidbit, he recalls a time when a young scribe made such a cord for a dancer at the local tavern. The scribe tied the knots perfectly, but forgot to keep his voice low. The whole tavern heard the name he whispered, and by the end of the night, the poor man's infatuation had become the subject of every joke in the district. The dancer was flattered, but she never returned his visits without an audience of curious friends tagging along. You run your fingers over the cord, feeling the faint roughness of the palm fiber and the subtle heat from where it has been resting in the old man's lap. It's easy to see how the act of creating such an object could feel like weaving your feelings directly into something tangible, a way of holding on to them, quite literally, even when the person you think of is far away. When you leave, the cord's image stays in your mind. The loops and knots, the way it curled in on itself like a secret that could only be untied by the right pair of hands. It makes you wonder whether the true magic lies in the cord's fibers or in the quiet, deliberate time spent making it.
The next morning, the air feels different, softer somehow, as though the breeze has been slowed by invisible threads. You're drawn toward the market, where stalls bustle with sellers calling out the freshness of their figs, the sweetness of their dates, the shimmer of their beads. Near the far end, tucked between a spice merchant and a seller of small clay lamps, you notice a woman sitting cross-legged on a woven mat. Her wares are not fruit or pottery, but little cloth pouches tied shut with thin cords, each stamped with a faint mark in red pigment. The mainstream fact is that amulets and charm bags were common in ancient Egypt, not only for protection, but also for matters of the heart. These small bundles might contain herbs, bits of papyrus with hieroglyphic inscriptions, tiny shells, or even fragments of faience, all chosen for their symbolic properties. When it came to love, a charm bag might be worn close to the body, sometimes hidden in the folds of clothing, or placed discreetly under a lover's pillow. The belief was that these physical objects carried a focused intent,
acting as a bridge between human desire and the divine will. The woman lifts one pouch, shakes it lightly so that you hear a muted rustle inside, and explains that this particular one contains dried rose petals, powdered cinnamon, and a scrap of linen inked with the name of Hathor. She says it should be carried on the left side of the body, closest to the heart. Historians still argue whether such charm bags were a universal practice or whether they flourished more in certain communities, perhaps those with stronger traditions of herbal healing. For the quirky tidbit, she tells you of a fisherman who once bought a charm bag from her, convinced it would make the woman he loved dream of him every night. It worked, sort of. The woman did dream about him, but in her dreams he was always bringing her baskets of fish, and the smell apparently woke her in a sour mood each time. Their romance never took hold, though the fisherman swore the charm was still mostly effective. You take one of the pouches in your hands, feeling the way it rests with surprising weight in your palm, as though it holds more than just dried plants and folded cloth. The faint scent of roses mingles with the sharper spice of cinnamon, and you imagine it pressed against the skin beneath someone's tunic, quietly radiating whatever hope or longing was sewn into its seams. Walking away from her stall, you find yourself thinking less about the ingredients inside and more about the way the little pouch seemed alive. Not in the literal sense, but in the way that objects sometimes carry the warmth of their maker's hands long after they've been set down.
The day wanes, the sun dipping low over the desert horizon, and you make your way toward a small courtyard tucked behind high mud brick walls. Inside, a few oil lamps cast their wavering glow over a circle of people sitting on reed mats. In the center is an elderly priestess, her hair silver and thin beneath a faded headcloth, her voice soft yet commanding as she speaks. Before her lies a shallow bronze bowl filled with water, its surface reflecting the lamplight in slow, liquid tremors. The mainstream fact is that water scrying, gazing into a reflective surface to divine answers, was practiced in ancient Egypt not only for predicting the future or communicating with the gods, but also for seeking insight into love and relationships. Some believed that if you stared into the water while repeating the name of a person you desired, their image might appear, offering a sign of whether your affection would be returned. It was a blend of spiritual consultation and private longing, done quietly so as not to invite gossip. The priestess dips her fingers into the water, flicking a few droplets toward the ground before gesturing for you to come closer. She tells you to lean in, to breathe evenly, to focus on the ripples. Historians still argue whether such practices were widely accepted religious rites or more of a fringe tradition, perhaps tolerated in some places and frowned upon in others. For the quirky tidbit, she chuckles while telling the story of a young man who once saw his beloved's face in the bowl, only to realize moments later it was actually the reflection of someone walking past behind him. Convinced the ritual had worked, he confessed his feelings, but to the wrong person. They ended up friends, though, and the mix-up became a local joke for years. You stare into the water, watching the dim glow of the lamps shiver across its surface. For a moment, you almost think you see a face, though you can't be sure if it's the light, your mind, or something else entirely. The priestess tells you softly that love charms are never just about changing someone else's heart. They're also about revealing your own. And with that, the circle begins to break up, the night air folding in as you step back out into the quiet street. The scents, the sounds, the stories of the day all blur together in your mind, a winding path of beliefs and small acts meant to sway the currents of feeling between people. You realize that every ritual, whether steeped in incense, knots, pouches, or water, carried not only the hope of love, but also the comfort of tradition, a way of feeling less alone in the uncertainty of human connection. Now the night has fully settled.
the streets resting in shadow, the Nile flowing in its unhurried way beneath the pale shimmer of the moon. You walk slowly, each step light, as though the air itself is inviting you to let go of the weight of the day. The warmth of the lamps fades behind you, replaced by the cool breath of the riverbank, where reeds sway gently, their tips brushing against one another with a sound so soft it could be mistaken for a whisper. The world seems quieter now, not because it has truly fallen silent, but because your mind has stopped reaching so far ahead or so far behind. Instead, you find yourself lingering in the gentle stillness of this moment. The stories you've heard of incense smoke curling upward like a thread to the unseen, of knots tightened with murmured names, of little charm bags sewn with care, of a face that may or may not appear in a bowl of water. They no longer feel like separate events. They've become part of a single, unbroken current, much like the Nile itself, moving at its own steady pace. You let your eyes drift to the horizon, where the faint glow of the stars is scattered like grains of sand across a deep blue canvas. Somewhere, far beyond what you can see, the people whose names were whispered into charms go about their nights, unaware of the small rituals done in their honor. And perhaps that's the quiet beauty of it, that love, in all its uncertainty, has always inspired people to create, to hope, and to believe in something just beyond the reach of ordinary explanation. The cool air brushes against your skin, carrying with it the faintest scent of lotus blossoms from a garden you passed earlier. You breathe in slowly, letting that fragrance fill the spaces in your mind where thoughts had once been crowded. There is no need now for questions or answers, for proof or persuasion, only the gentle awareness that you are here, that you have seen and felt these stories, and that they will remain with you like the lingering warmth of the day's last light. And as you finally close your eyes, the quiet hum of the night settles around you, as steady and comforting as the river's endless flow, guiding you into the soft depths of sleep.